Hello and welcome to Out Loud. I'm your host, Greg Thompson. Today I'm sitting down with Kelsey Davis. Kelsey is fresh off of graduating from Vanderbilt Divinity School with her master's in divinity. While she's been here in Nashville, she's been the chaplain assistant for young adult ministry at St. Augustine's Episcopal Chapel and the school chapel intern at the Episcopal School of Nashville. After her graduate studies at the University of Portland, Kelsey followed a career playing pro soccer and later coaching. Now, at the end of her time at Vanderbilt, Kelsey will soon begin a new role as the Curator for Emerging Communities for the Episcopal Diocese of El Camino Real in California. Kelsey is Episcopalian, identifies as queer, goes by the gender pronouns she, her, hers, and is married to her wife Heather of 2 years. Our conversation leads to questions of what it takes to truly listen and be in community with one another today. So with that in mind, let's take a listen. Thanks for joining us, Kelsey.
Thank you.
So to start off, when we chatted before the interview, you explained to me that you identify as lesbian, but also more broadly as queer. Could you break down those terms for us, and specifically what those terms mean to you?
Sure. So my knee-jerk impulse was to say that I identify as a lesbian simply because I'm cisgendered, and I am cisgender female, and I am married to a woman who is also cisgender female. And so, I've only had romantic relationships with women throughout my life. And so that's the knee jerk, is that the romantic partnering has always been with women. But I would say, sort of panning out from that for me is a more, more holistically is that I identify more so with a queer labeling. And that to me, and Heather and I talk about this a lot, but that to me is more that sort of whatever is seemingly normative, we kind of want to shake up and challenge, which is for me both a spiritual and a romantic thing. So where I find intimacy, is not just necessarily in gender or sex, but also in like disposition and posture. And so to me, it's a queer way to move through the world, is to challenge whatever is normative culturally, and also just always sort of be working against the stream of assumptions and what is status quo.
So something you also said before we sat down was that you discovered girls and Jesus at the same time.
Yeah.
And I just loved that.
Yeah.
And so when was that moment for you, of that self-realization, if you will? And what was that time like for you?
Yeah, I didn't, I grew up, I guess the term is unchurched. So I grew up unchurched in Southern California. My parents were pretty liberal, and so I had a lot of free reign, I guess you could say. I was brought up on the canon of novels and literature and Shakespeare and Canterbury Tales and the Book of Virtues and things like that. So for me, those were the stories that really shaped my moral compass. And when I became a teenager, I think in 7th grade, I remember sitting next to my best friend at the time in PE class in middle school. And she invited me to her youth group, a non-denominational church. And I was intrigued. I think I was more so intrigued maybe by her than I was necessarily youth group at the time, now reflecting back. But I couldn't go because I always had soccer practice on the Wednesday night the youth group was. Then when I got to high school, my first girlfriend, or evolving love, I guess, she was my best friend, and then things became more romantic and we were more physically intrigued with each other than friends are normally. Mm-hmm. She was a pretty devout, non-denominational Christian, and she was really the first person that started to actually tell me about Christianity, about this Jesus character, and and I obviously loved her and wanted to be around her, so I started to go to church with her, and kind of just from there got swept up in this Jesus story. And I remember coming home and telling my parents. I came out to my parents when I was like 16, 17 years old.
And was this before or after?
So this was after. So we were in, friendship, in a relationship. Okay. And I was going to church with her, and came home, decided to come out to my parents. My parents were fine with it. I mean, my mom cried because she just felt like she was worried that I felt like I couldn't tell them, or I was going to be mad or something. They were going to be mad. But they weren't. My dad basically said, I've known since you were 10, and I've been kind of waiting for this day. And super loving and amazing. So it was cool. But then about a year later, we continued in the relationship, and about a year later, I decided that I wanted to be baptized. Okay. And when I came back to my parents and told them that, they were like, wait, what? What? Then my dad was like, okay, now we need to talk. I'm going to take you. He took me straight down to Barnes & Noble. I remember this, took me to the world religion section, bought me a couple of books on comparative religion, and said, read these, and if you still want to do the Christianity thing at the end of this, that's okay. But at least know what you're getting yourself into. Wow. And promise me that you will never try to convert anyone to Christianity, and that you will always respect other people's belief systems and perspectives, and remain open even as you, pursue what you feel like you need to do.
That is such good advice.
It's so good. And at the time I was like,
starting point.
I know. And at the time I was like, sure, Dad, whatever. I just wanted to get baptized. But that those promises stuck with me, and I really do try my best to live by those two things. So.
Wow. So it sounds like, coming out into Christianity was more a bigger deal to your parents than than the normal coming out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, coming out into Christianity was definitely more earth-shattering. Mm-hmm. We had to work through that as a family, and I remember very clearly that the first time I wanted to go on a missions trip, my parents were very resistant. And at that point in high school, I'd already traveled all over the world with soccer. Mm-hmm. And so I remember fighting with them and saying, you'll let me go on these soccer trips all over the world, but you won't let me go on this mission trip this one time, where we're driving. I don't even have to get on an airplane. And I remember sitting on the floor of my room, writing in my journal and saying, this feels so unfair, and being, mad. But yeah, it was definitely something we had to work through. My dad was an intellectual man. He was a lawyer and majored in Shakespearean literature, and was a hippie for all intents and purposes. So he was also really concerned for me too. I remember one of the first conversations we had was after I got baptized. He said, I want you to remember too that I'm your father, and I love you no matter what. And if God is our collective father or parent, then you need to remember that God loves you no matter what too. And he was really afraid that Christianity would be a long, hard road for me because of my orientation. Mm. And also, I think, because of my personality too. And so he was really afraid that I would be rejected by the church.
What about your personality was he worried about?
I'm a kind of a creative, quirky cat. I'm like put together enough, I think, to function well in society. But, when I'm in my home space and kind of letting my free spirit reign, I'm a quirky kid. So I think he knew that, and Christianity has a long history of trying to hammer that stuff out of us instead of embracing natural, free-spirited quirk. And I think he was concerned that I would allow that to get hammered out of me.
Was that the Christianity you ultimately encountered?
Yeah, at first. Okay. At first it was. Well, I was met with a lot of love in my youth formation. I was met with a lot of love. I had a pretty amazing youth pastor and youth mentors, one of which helped coordinate our wedding, 2 summers ago, and is an amazing human being that I'm still grateful for.
Yeah.
But, as I evolved, I encountered more of that in my undergraduate years and after college. But not now.
Yeah.
Yeah, not now. The Episcopal Church is good to me. I love it. So. Yeah,
so how did you see this first church that you were at initially? Mm-hmm. You said that was a non-denominational church. Mm-hmm. So then how did you ultimately land on being Episcopal?
I think it's like the grace of God or something. I think that's what we call it. But the work of the Spirit. So I started off at the non-denominational church. And like I said, my youth formation there I was very loved, and had a great experience. And so that kept the kindle of the fire burning, and I instantly fell in love with the God story and with the person and the character of Jesus. And so for me, having had my first relationship with a woman tied so closely into the inception of seeing my place in this God story, or being invited into that, into the family, if you will, and getting baptized. My faith and sexuality they still are absolutely inseparable. Like I haven't known a minute without Jesus and without like the intimacy of a woman's love in my life. And so what ended up happening was that when I moved away to college at Portland, I continued to seek out non-denominational church space because that's what I had been formed in as a youth. And it was good for a lot of reasons. I mean, there was natural community there. There was wonderful worship and music and a pretty amazing commitment to studying scripture and wrestling theologically with belief. However, what I found was sort of a consistent mantra of this love the sinner, hate the sin. And so I felt like I was either going to find my belonging by renouncing my orientation, or I was going to have to wander around and figure something else out. Like the two became mutually exclusive to me. Like, we'll love you and you're welcome in here to a point, and then we're going to pray for you and hope that you're healed or you become celibate or like something like there was like a stipulation around it.
Yeah, condition.
Yeah, condition, yeah. And so that was heartbreaking. That was absolutely heartbreaking. And like, how do I choose between this God that I love and the way that I feel naturally inclined and predisposed to love? And I remember being at the University of Portland, which is a Holy Cross school, and sitting in Mass for the first time on a Sunday night. I just thought, what the heck, I'll just wander over there. I'll try it out. I was exhausted because as being a student athlete, usually we had games on Sundays and we're traveling, and I wandered over there, and I remember the sky. There was a full moon in the sky. It was just like a starry night. It was beautiful. I was all by myself. I remember I walked in, the baptismal font was there, and I thought that was beautiful. And I sat down and saw, some candles lit, and there was a community gathered of students. And I remember moving through the liturgy and, standing up, sitting down, saying the prayers together, the responsive stuff, all of it. And then the homily that was given, I don't remember the content of what was said, but I remember how I felt. And I thought, oh my God, this is exactly where I need to be. It was like the Spirit of God, like kissed my cheek or something. And I thought, my God, this is beautiful. And there's, it's quiet space, and we spent time in silence, and the homily was meaningful and was more open and inviting in than it was sort of any sort of judgment or beating down or beating anything out of any of us. So I thought, well, I saw that there was a silent retreat coming up, and I had a couple days, and so I thought, try that. Yeah. And I remember going on the silent retreat, and that was absolutely life-changing for me. Well, I slept for 2 days straight of it. 2 of the 3 days I basically slept, which happens on silent retreats. Yeah. And so, but I remember walking and just being completely still and alone. There's a community, but alone in my own conversation in my own head, and meeting with a spiritual director for the first time, which was like an anomaly to me. I hadn't even heard of that before. And after the retreat, I continued to meet with that spiritual director. She was the first person who really sat down with me, and from a very centered, faithful posture said, let's explore this faith and sexuality thing. Let's just for a minute imagine that God is actually love, like the Bible says. And what does that do when I tell you that? What does that do in your spirit? I burst into tears. And so we spent about 6 months meditating and praying and contemplating truly what it feels like if it's possible that God is actually love, what does that really mean for my life? And so slowly but surely, all of the layers started to pull back, and I got to a place where I was like, well, if this God is good and we are good, and if God is love and we are made by love and for love, then maybe the way that I love isn't so bad after all. And it sounds so simple, but when that satiates into your soul, there's something incredible, there's something revolutionary that happens. And all of a sudden it stopped becoming about who I was loving, but how I was loving. And so out of that, this beautiful ethic started to develop. So I'm like, okay, not only who did Jesus love, but how did Jesus love? Because I want to love like that. Yeah. So I found my way into the Catholic Church for a minute in college, and fell in love with the liturgy, sacramental theology, the order of worship, contemplative prayer, the saints. I mean, all of it. I was just loving it. I felt like I'd stepped into a family that I'd lost. Wow. Maybe it's prodigal-esque or something. I don't know. Yeah. There's some parable in there. So, and then fast forward, I went away from it all because, I graduated, played professional soccer, then ended up coaching college soccer, and got involved with helping out with a pup church in Fort Worth, Texas, that was a extension of an Lutheran church in the area, ELCA church.
Okay.
And so that was my community. That was my worshiping community for a few years, and it was awesome. And I got to then experience what creative ministry looks like and what creative worship can look like. And so I had this like Catholic, Holy Cross Catholic experience, this like deep liturgical sacramental stuff going on, juxtaposed now with this like creative worshiping community. And I thought, my God, can we like smash these two things together? Because that would be a dream. And that community was so welcoming and so loving also. So the love I experienced from Holy Cross priests and Dominican sisters at the University of Portland, they were so good to me and walked with me through all of these questions. Then this pub church community was like an explosion of love and goodness also. So then I got to Vanderbilt here, and one of my buddies said, you have to go meet Becca Stevens at St. Augustine's. So you will love the Episcopal Church. You will love Becca. You will be more than welcome here. Like, just come. So I went and remembered that I had actually been baptized Episcopalian as a baby, even though I was unchurched. So my grandparents were Episcopalian. So this is like this weird full circle thing happening. I was like, oh, yeah, that the Episcopal Church, that sounds interesting to me. Yeah, I think I remember that word from somewhere. And I called my mom, and she was like, yeah, you were baptized Episcopalian. I was like, okay. So, and I joked that I was like a stray cat at St. Augustine's because I went to one Wednesday night contemplative Eucharist dinner. They fed me. And then I just never went back. Like, I just kept going back there and then like getting like literally fed and spiritually fed. So I was like the stray cat of St. Augustine's. And
I don't think that's not normal for some people. Right. A lot of churches, they show up and then leave, come back.
Yeah. So I found my way to the Episcopal Church through St. Augustine's and have absolutely fallen in love with the community and with the denomination. And am hoping to devote my life's work to the Episcopal Church and the gifts that God has given me to share those resources with the Episcopal Church. So I've been baptized, confirmed, and Heather's been baptized and confirmed, my wife. So we're like signed, sealed, and delivered right now in terms of being full in.
Yeah, you're completely on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what has that been like for your relationship? Like how have both of you kind of walked through this journey together? And again, kind of bringing that, like, as you've understood this as this faith piece has kind of gotten some new labels and you've started to kind of figure out what it means for you more. Like, what has that meant for your relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. Heather and I find a lot of commonality in our spirituality. She has an interesting story too. She grew up Methodist. I would say that Heather loves the Episcopal Church. We love the Episcopal Church because there's so much freedom to ask really important and good questions in a way that's faithful. And there's a lot of freedom to be creative, to join in the work of the Spirit of God, and to be a part of a loving community that's imperfect and that prioritizes reconciliation and difference and says, let's stay at this table and like love each other and try to find our way through it. And so, unity through reconciliation is really important to the Episcopal Church. So for Heather and I, as a young couple living into the sacrament of marriage, having a community that's about loving across difference, that's about reconciliation, that is constantly trying to find more ways to be hospitable in mind, body, and spirit. It's really edifying for our marriage to see those examples all around us, because we also seek that in our marriage, to stay together and be faithful and ask really important questions and wrestle with things, and to always seek reconciliation with each other, ourselves and each other. So really at the base, sort of the theological core and the ethical values of the denomination really match what the theological core and the ethical values are of our marriage also. So it's shaping us, which it should do. It's sort of a mutual challenge and a mutual nurture. And so, we have the freedom to push and pull as much as the body pushes and pulls us too. But it's been great for our marriage. I love being 30-somethings and committed to a community, intergenerationally committed to a community. Without kids, we actually just purely want to be in the community and can't wait to bring children into that community too.
Yeah, and I think that's really, a struggle for the millennial generation, if you will, as organized church is becoming less and less popular. It's but despite that, finding community, I think, is still important to most of the people I talk to, and it's still at the heart of what they're maybe looking for, and whether it's through a graduate school program they're in or through their coworkers in the office, finding a cohesive community is still something I think so many people yearn for.
Yeah.
That's so great that you found that there.
Yeah, and I think that, with the millennial generation, and as a millennial, I'll speak for myself and not the entire generation and population, but for me and for us, and I can speak for us because we talk about this a lot, that for us, belonging really precedes belief for us. So while I might not completely be down with all of the words of the Nicene Creed on Sunday morning, I can understand that creed is a historical document of our faith, that it's telling me something about where we've come from. But that is not the barrier for me being present on Sunday morning anymore. What invites me into Sunday morning is the belonging and the belovedness that I feel when we are present. And so we can figure out and wrestle with all of the belief stuff as we go along, and we are doing that as a community. But that's where I see that the church is going to have to continue to evolve, is that historically belief has come first, and then you get initiated in, and then belonging happens. And I think we have to find good ways to create spaces of belonging. And a lot of that, especially as a queer woman, comes with knowing that my full self and full embodiment is embraced and loved and invited to flourish in church space.
Yeah. What is it meant for you to belong in your church space? How is the community communicated to you belong?
Yeah. Well, for one, a lot of them showed up at our wedding, yeah. Everyone that was invited in. But I think so, yes. And it's everything from a smile walking through the door, every time we walk through the door, to being invited to share our gifts in the community. So for me, I've been invited to teach and preach, to help lead in different ways, to be a curator of our young adult community. Heather's been invited in different ways to use her gifts as well. We get to go to birthday parties and celebrations and pray together and laugh together and cry together. So, I think that there are practical components as much as spiritual components that not only are we welcome, but we're celebrated. I've also seen our community stand with us in a diocese that is tough on this issue, and in this conversation is very divided on faith and sexuality, and so I've seen them stand with us, and so it's the smile is an authentic, genuine smile, like, you really are glad to have us here, and also you are glad to have us here because you love us, and because you love us, you will stand with us in every form. From listening to me process crazy ideas for paper topics, to me weeping because I'm frustrated that we still couldn't get married in our church here, to going out to lunch and talking about how good the guacamole is at Chipotle, So it's like spanning what life is.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like they're like a major part of your life. Like,
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What comes to mind too, though, is that, like, with community and belonging also comes commitment, like diving in head first and saying, like, all right, I'm gonna really, like, stick it out and go to that lunch at Chipotle today because I should get to know these people or something. What caught you? Like, what got you to make that commitment?
So I have always grown up on teams since I was 5 years old. I have never not known life without team, and all of the rituals that come with that, all of the commitment that comes with that, to showing up because I said I would, and thinking that someone's going to care if I'm not there. That was ingrained in me when I was little. And so for me, community like this is it's just a natural evolution in how I understand team and team dynamics, is that I'm a member of this community, and I've been confirmed and baptized and work here. I have listened to people's stories here, so I am in possession then of some of the stories of people's lives. So that in and of itself is a commitment to keep showing up. And so it's just what I've known. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that that's all I do 24 hours a day, or that we don't take breaks or say we can't be places. But I really try to be a good teammate, and whether that's as a friend in my friendship circles or as a church community member, it's like I have gifts. God has given me gifts, and my response is to share those gifts, and my responsibility is to share those gifts and to receive the gifts from others that are in community too. And so if I don't show up, if my presence isn't there, I'm not doing that. I also, like I said, I'm a stray cat. I mean, I'm an only child, and so I've always had to kind of make friends as I've moved through life and find pockets of communities. And so I also have always lived the value of that too. I joke that I was, born of a mother and a father, but raised by a village of people. So people have always been the most important thing in my life, because I wouldn't have survived or even thrived without them.
I think there's something really humble about that, and selfless about that. Going into a church community especially, and not asking, like, what am I going to get out of this? But to your point, like, what gifts am I offering? What am I bringing to the table to share with everyone else?
Yeah, it's huge.
And then we see that symbolically in the liturgy, depending on the tradition. But yeah.
Yeah.
So your thesis, while you've been at Vanderbilt, has been on LGBT youth in the Episcopal Church. What have been some of your findings in this process of writing that?
That the church, no matter the denomination, has a deep responsibility to open its ears even wider and to center youth, and especially youth and young adult voice in the community and surrounding culture. The age group that I researched was adolescents, which arguably, depending on who you're reading, is now from about 10 to 12-ish to about 22-ish. So it stretches basically a decade of life. It is the based off of neuroscience, it is the second wave of plasticity in the brain. So what happens from 0 to 3 in terms of development and formation is, scientists are now finding that adolescence is the second wave of plasticity. So it's sort of the second shot at really intense brain development, that your identity and your formation is, that stage of life is like deeply impacted by the events that are happening. So, for example, if I were to say to you, tell me one of your memories where you felt most loved, or you felt most hurt, or, your first kiss or something, that intensity, those memories that typically someone would share would be from adolescence, because of that second wave of plasticity in the brain, that the imprinting that's happening during adolescence is like lifelong stuff.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to look at LGBTQ plus youth and to see what's going on in adolescence, but what's going on particularly with our LGBTQ plus youth community. What are some of the social realities that they're facing that we as a church body need to be listening to, so that our welcome of hospitality isn't just sort of an empty, come be in our communities, but then you have to assimilate and adapt and change so that you fit the prescribed structure of what's happening. Yeah. And, one of the things that I found from one of the articles that I read was that researchers have found, especially in the Mid-South region, so all of my research was based in the Mid-South region, so this area of the country, but that youth that are rejected by their peers are 20 times more likely to attempt self-harm or attempt suicide.
20 times?
20 times.
Wow.
And so we have to back up and say, well, where are those ideologies coming from, like those rejection type of behaviors in adolescence? And they're culturally conditioned. I mean, they're coming from the school, the religious, sort of in the family spheres. And so as a religious institution, what is our responsibility in how we are conditioning and the messaging that we're putting forth into the family or into individuals' lives that are either going to be messages of hope and love, or they're going to be messages of death and despair and rejection. Yeah. And so I found a lot of things. I could probably talk for an hour about it, but I think at the baseline, it's the whole project was about looking holistically from all of these different lenses, the theological, the ethical, the social, spiritual, as to what's going on with LGBTQ plus youth. And then how can we listen to what's going on and what the needs and hopes and desires are alongside the social realities, put those things together and be open enough as an institution to make changes so that all people can flourish in the church and have life abundantly. So that was the crux of the project. And so at the end of it, I made practical suggestions to say, based off of all of this research, everything that we now know in this paper, here are my practical suggestions for ministry of like how to restructure what the church is doing.
Sure.
One of which is like this binary sorting of you have men's group and women's group, or the girls get separated from the boys. That doesn't work. What if we grouped, and this comes from an idea I found in a book by Cody Sanders, which is wonderful. It's a guide to ministry with LGBTQIA youth. It's I think one of the best books on youth ministry. But Cody quotes another woman I can't remember right now, but basically he offers up the suggestion, what if we structure youth ministries or our ministries by learning style or interest or creative capacity rather than by gender or by sex? So like, what if we had one group that loved hiking in the woods, and you go hike and do that? Or if we had another group that wanted to sit down and have a cup of tea and a good conversation and study the Bible together, you know, what if we just reimagined how we sort people and by what criteria we are sorting people? And I thought that was brilliant.
And that's how we're already organizing ourselves online, it seems, with Facebook groups or meetups. It's so often organized by interest, just like that. Except here it's, okay, you actually know these people and saw them at church on Sunday.
Exactly. And what if, you know, especially for youth, you know, with sex education in the church or faith and sexuality education, it's not just the boys learn what the boy, you know, biology is and the girls, but what if the community was able to learn together and start to destigmatize some of this sort of taboo culture we have around sexuality? And what if the church took the lead on that? I think that would be pretty cool.
That would be great. Well, and I think from my own experience of working at within the Catholic Church, it's whenever you bring up youth ministry, there's kind of this, or really youth education in general, religious ed for K through 12. There was always this kind of groan of like, oof, like we got to find volunteers, we got to find teachers, and where I was, I observed a lot of just kind of, we just got to get through this, and this is the curriculum, and this is what we're doing, and there wasn't this kind of viewpoint at all as to the magnitude of the minds, of our ability to shape the minds before us. And I think that groan ultimately was like recognizing that, like, we're tired of this. Maybe that's why we can't get volunteers, because somewhere within this system there's been a break and no one really wants to be here anymore. That's my own hypothesis. But hearing this kind of I think like proactive, what if the church were the leader? I mean, like, I think that would get better turnout.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think, you know, with religious education or formation, right, the catechesis, I mean, you come from a Catholic perspective, I'm in the Episcopal Church, we're like cousins of each other.
We joke that you're Catholic light.
Yeah, sure. But, you know, we both are equipped with this beautiful program of religious education, and I love what the Episcopal Church is doing in terms of the youth curriculum. I think it's fantastic. You know, I get to be a school chaplain right now for pre-K through fourth grade, and you know, I work closely with our youth director at the church, and I do young adult ministry, and so I love what our church is doing. I also think that there has to continue to be innovative, creative, and discerning ways for us to think about what religious education is, truly. Because programs don't change people. People transform people.
Amen.
Yeah. So if we get too stuck on the programs and getting through the curriculum and we lose the person, or the personhood even of ourselves as the teachers, you know, not even the teachers, but the adult facilitators. I mean, the youth are the teachers also. Then we've missed it. But if we can learn alongside one another, stay open to the creative spirit of God, to be innovative in the way that we are engaging the material so that it's life-giving, I'd want to do that, you know? So I just think it has to be both, right? It has to be education, but it also has to be open to whatever we think we're doing to be adapted and changed, because that's how the Spirit of God moves. So, but that's the scary part, is not to just copy and paste from 10 years ago.
Yeah, that is the scary part.
Yeah.
What, you said that you've been working with some of the youth and young adults at your parish, and working with them talking to them about faith and sexuality a bit. What have those conversations been like?
Yeah, our youth are under the guidance of our youth director, and they do an amazing job with the faith and sexuality conversations. Our church publishing just put out a amazing curriculum called These Are Our Bodies, I think in 2016. And I used part of it for the research of the paper that I wrote. And it's a faith and sexuality curriculum for church and home. And it goes basically from infants all the way through 30 years old and is developmentally appropriate along the way. And so, but our church was have been having these faith and sexuality conversations for years prior to even this curriculum. And I think they're going to slowly adapt the curriculum as well into the conversation. But we're just really lucky because we have, midwives and nurses and doctors, and we have beautiful people in our congregation who help with the youth education, who are well versed on this stuff and know recent terminology and are open and affirming and embracing of our youth and our whole community. And so I think they've done an amazing job.
So you are on the cusp of moving and taking on a new role in, what does it say here? You're a curator for emerging communities. That's a great title. What will you be doing, or what do you hope to be doing in this new role in California?
It is a great title. When I saw the title and the job description, I cried. So I didn't think a job like this existed in our church, and it didn't. This is a brand new position, which I'm incredibly grateful for. It's been a position that's been discerned by the diocese as a whole under the leadership of Bishop Mary Gray Reeves for some years now. It's been, I think, a couple years in the making. So it's really, my job, at least for the long haul, but definitely for the interim, is to do a lot of listening and to learn the names and the stories of the people that are in the diocese, to learn their hopes and dreams, to accompany them in those hopes and dreams, to explore what emerging community means.
What is this term emerging communities, like what do you expect that to be? What does that mean to you?
I see it as an image more than a definition right now. I think, when I think of something emerging, I think of a seed that's been planted in good soil, hopefully. Well, I know that it has, because this diocese is phenomenal. So a seed that's been planted in good soil, that's pushing through the earth, that still needs to be tended to, watered and given sunshine and the right nutrients to thrive. I see it also as a church that doesn't exist yet. So church in new shape and new forms by new definition, There's an innovative and creative quality to an emerging community. I think that there's also a really cool harnessing of tradition, the right components of tradition that create the container so that we can live, like ritual or Eucharist or baptism, liturgy itself. And harnessing those components to help structure the creative community and invite more conversation, more dialogue with each other and with God. So I have a whiteboard in my bedroom that when I get up in the middle, I get weird ideas. I told you it was quirky. I get weird ideas in the middle of the night. I'll go write on my whiteboard.
That's great.
So I have a bunch of ideas already starting to sketch, which means that I have to do even more listening once I get there, because it's not just me and my ideas, but I do have some, like a pub church or a pub theology type of environment would be an example of an emerging community, or a group that gathers for a contemplative Eucharist on a Sunday night, is an example of an emerging community. So we'll see. And, when I spoke with the bishop, she said, this is, enjoy this time of graduation season and transition. And she said, and then we'll start to discern where the work begins. And she told me that it's less of a birthing time and more of this has been a conception time. It's been the inception of all of this work, and then we have to continue to birth it.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. A lot of metaphor, a lot of abstraction, but that's how the Spirit works, man. I mean, I
think that's how ideas grow. Often is you don't quite
don't know
exactly what it's going to be. You don't have a checklist
right
away.
There's no playbook for this.
Yeah.
Which again is exciting and terrifying. But that means that I get to learn even more so how discernment really works and how listening and trusting the Spirit of God really truly works. So I'm coming from an academic setting where, I'm recovering from perfectionism. It's true. It's a performance perfectionist culture that we live in. And I'm stepping into some of the most spiritual work that I've done in my entire life, where I have to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not okay in graduate school.
Right. You can't write a paper that just says, I don't know. But I don't know right now. And that's okay.
Yeah. I just have one more question. We've talked a lot about, I think, identity throughout, and, from you playing soccer to coming out to then coming out to your faith, then graduate school, and now this new role you're going to be stepping into. Like, do you feel like with all of this that's happened over the last decade or so, do you feel like you are more authentically you today? And how has that grown for you?
What a great question. I love that. Yeah, I feel the most authentic at this moment in my life than I ever have. And that is such a gift, to feel comfortable in my own skin finally, to know that everything that I am, my full identity, from head to toe, is deeply loved by God. And I know that, though, because of the presence of the community in which I live. And so the idea, being told that I'm loved and deeply, deeply loved is no longer an idea for me. It has a spiritual and embodied quality because of the human beings that are around me. And I've held that mirror back up to me. And so I feel authentic, I feel known, I feel seen, I feel loved, understood even, which is its own miracle. And that is a direct result of the community. I cannot say that enough. And so that is also, you asked why I show up to community. It's because I've been the recipient of people showing up in my life over and over and over again. So I think that, I hope I always remember the responsibility that we have to be careful and careful, like fully caring with how we show up with each other.
Thank you so much for taking the time to sit and chat.
Yeah, thank you.
A special thanks to Kelsey Davis again for joining us on this episode. For a few of the resources and terms mentioned during this interview, check out our show notes in the episode description and online on the episode guide you can find at outloudstories.com. This episode was made possible by hours of editing, both by me and by the wonderful, fantastic, and perhaps simultaneously biggest fan of the show, Meg McKillen. Thank you, Meg. To learn more about our show, visit us at outloudstories.com or on social media at outloudstories. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so that you get our episode right when it drops. Next time on the show, we have Luther Young.
The good boy who grew up in the church and sang in the children's choir and became the minister of music and went off to college and is doing really great things has now disappointed us because he's gay. And understanding how difficult that is for my family and people that helped raise me, it was just difficult all around.
We'll see you back here in 2 weeks. I'm your host, Greg Thompson. Thanks so much for listening. Peace.